He thought he ruled the school until the doors opened and everything changed. Watch till the end, and don't forget to subscribe, like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The morning at Westbrook High began with the usual rhythm of lockers slamming and sneakers squeaking against polished floors. Laughter drifted through the corridors, blending with the hurried footsteps of students darting from one class to the next. Bright posters were taped unevenly along the walls, declaring bold words about respect, tolerance, and friendship. But no one paid them attention anymore. They had become wallpaper, hollow reminders of ideals that rarely found a place in the hallways where cruelty thrived quietly beneath the surface. Among the flow of students moved Leah Van Damme, her dark hair tied neatly into a ponytail, her books pressed tightly to her chest. She walked with quiet steps, never rushing, never drawing attention to herself. She preferred to fade into the background, to slip through unnoticed. Most of her classmates did not know, or had simply forgotten, that her father was Jean-Claude Van Damme, one of the most famous martial artists in the world. She never brought it up. It wasn't who she wanted to be known as. She did not crave the spotlight that followed him everywhere. She wanted to be left alone with her books, her drawings, her thoughts. Where her father was bold and commanding, Leah was soft-spoken and cautious. She kept her gaze lowered when others looked her way. She avoided conflict, not out of cowardice, but out of instinct, knowing that silence often carried her safely through the storm of adolescence. Yet, in the eyes of some, her quietness was not a strength. It was a weakness. They saw not discipline in her silence, but fragility. And in a place like Westbrook High, weakness attracted predators. The shift in the atmosphere was always the first warning. Conversations dulled, laughter faded, and the sound of footsteps sharpened against the tile. At the far end of the corridor appeared Trevor Hayes. Broad-shouldered, tall, his chest puffed with arrogance, he walked as if the school belonged to him. A few boys trailed behind him, orbiting him like satellites. Their laughter came too quickly at his words, their eyes waiting for him to decide who would be his entertainment that morning. Students stepped aside naturally as Trevor passed, shoulders pressing to lockers, gazes dropping toward the floor. Some rummaged pointlessly through their bags to avoid his glance, pretending they had something urgent to do. Others held their breaths as though invisibility could shield them. Leah noticed the sudden hush too late. She was standing near the lockers, balancing her books, lost in thought about a history essay. When silence spread like a ripple, she lifted her eyes just in time to see Trevor's grin stretch across his face. He changed direction without hesitation, heading toward her. His group followed eagerly, their sneakers squeaking against the tiles. Leah's heart sank. She tightened her grip on her books, trying to steady her breath, but her pulse betrayed her, hammering against her chest. She had seen this play out before, with others, sometimes with herself. She had no illusion about what was coming. Well, what do we have here?" Trevor's voice boomed across the hall. Heads turned, some students pausing mid-step, already pulling out their phones. He raised his chin slightly, eyes locking on her, Jean-Claude Van Damme's little girl. "Do you kick as hard as your daddy, or are you just hiding behind his name?" A ripple of laughter broke from his friends. The cruel sound bounced off the walls, echoing through the corridor. Leah lowered her eyes, pressing her books tighter to her chest. She said nothing. She had promised herself not to react, not to give him the satisfaction. She bent her head slightly, hoping to slip past him, but Trevor shifted quickly, blocking her path with a sharp shoulder check. The impact jolted her books from her arms. They spilled to the ground, papers scattering across the polished floor like a burst of snow. His friends erupted with louder laughter. "Oops," Trevor drawled, pretending innocence, his smirk making it clear he had planned it. "Guess you're clumsy." Leah crouched quickly, gathering her papers, her fingers trembling as she reached for a sketch that had slipped free. It bore a simple phrase she had written to herself. "Stand tall, even in the storm." She tried to tuck it back into her notebook before he could notice, but his eyes narrowed. "What's this?" he asked, bending slightly to catch a glimpse. His lips curled. "Little speeches? Writing down Mommy's motivational quotes? Or Daddy's?" He held the words like a weapon, mocking. His friends cackled behind him, egging him on. Leah's cheeks burned, but she kept her gaze down, refusing to meet his eyes. She reached for another book, but Trevor's sneaker slammed onto the cover, pinning it against the floor. The sharp smack of rubber against paper rang louder than the laughter. Her fingers froze. Slowly, she lifted her head. His grin had sharpened into something more sinister. The crowd around them had grown, a half circle of students pressing in. Phones rose higher now, their cameras glowing, capturing every detail. Some students whispered nervously, but no one stepped forward. "Come on," Trevor said, leaning closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Say something. Tell me to stop. Show us some of that famous Van Damme fire." His tone was mocking, daring her to resist. Her lips parted, but no words came. Her chest tightened as she gripped her books tighter. Shame burned in her face. She hated the stillness of her body, the silence that betrayed her. She wanted to shout, to strike back, to be fearless like her father. But she wasn't him. Trevor's palm slammed against the locker above her shoulder, the clang reverberating down the hall. Leah flinched, her body pressing back against the cold metal. His shadow loomed over her, blocking the light. His friends jeered, their laughter blending into a cruel chorus. "Don't walk away from me," he sneered. "We're not done." The crowd chuckled, their voices hollow, but beneath it there was unease. A few shifted nervously, but none dared to intervene. Leah's breath quickened, her eyes darting desperately for an escape. The posters on the walls seemed to mock her now, their words about respect and kindness nothing but lies. Trevor leaned closer, his cologne sharp, his breath hot. "What's it like, being weak?" he hissed, "when your father's supposed to be the toughest man alive?" The words cut deeper than the shove. They sank into her chest, heavy, suffocating. She closed her eyes briefly, forcing herself not to cry. But the pressure grew unbearable. Around her, the hall felt smaller, the laughter sharper, the silence of those who could have helped more crushing than any shove. Her world had shrunk to the sound of his voice, the weight of his presence, and the sting of shame. And in that moment, as the cruel game continued and the laughter swelled louder, Leah understood something chilling. This wasn't going to end with books scattered across the floor. It was only the beginning. Trevor's sneaker ground down on the edge of Leah's book, rubber scraping paper with a dry hiss that made her flinch. He didn't need to press hard. The point was never about force, it was about the performance, the way his pose said that even gravity obeyed him, the way the half-circle of students swallowed the moment like an audience waiting for a punchline. He looked down at her, and the grin that had started as theater sharpened into intent. "Pick it up," he said, not moving his foot. Leah's fingers hovered, the tremor in them betraying her. She breathed slowly, trying to find the steadiness her father drilled into her years ago when they practiced focus. Not strikes, not flashy moves, just breath like a metronome. In for 4, out for 6. It worked on stage fright before a class presentation. It did not work here. The air felt thin, her throat tightened. Trevor lifted his shoe just enough that she reached for the book and then slammed it down again. Laughter erupted from his friends, quick and sharp, like the clack of pool balls breaking. Leah's knuckles whitened. She kept her eyes low, focusing on the scuffed tile, the bent corner of her book where the cover had begun to peel. She could fix a ripped cover. She could not fix the eyes. "Told you," one of the boys behind Trevor snorted. "She doesn't even talk. TV martial artist for a dad, and she can't even stand up." "Maybe she only does autographs," another chimed in. "Hey, Leah, sign my shoe." Trevor shifted, bored of the book. His gaze slid to her backpack strap, slung over her shoulder and cutting across her chest. He caught it with 2 fingers and flicked, testing her reaction like a cat with string. Leah flinched despite herself. He smirked and yanked hard. The strap tore over her shoulder, and the bag thudded to the floor, the zipper popping wide with a sound like a gasp. Everything spilled at once. Textbooks fanned out, pens skittered under shoes. A spiral notebook flipped open and paged itself in a frantic flutter. A small tube of lip balm rolled until someone's sneaker halted it. A keychain, shaped like tiny boxing gloves, red leather worn smooth from years of being thumbed for courage, tumbled and spun to a stop in the center of the circle. Beside it landed a photograph in a clear sleeve. Leah, younger, her hair shorter, smiling up and sideways at her father, while he looked straight at the camera with that calm, unflinching stare everyone recognized. Trevor's hand shot toward the photo before she could grab it. The clear sleeve snapped in his fingers. He held the image overhead, like a coach raising a trophy he hadn't earned. "Look," he said, turning slowly so the arc of phones could catch it. "Family portrait, legend, and little shadow." "Let me have it," Leah said, the plea escaping before she could swallow it back. It sounded small to her own ears, even smaller in the noisy silence of the crowd. Trevor lowered the photo as if he would give it, then let it slip. It fell face up. Leah moved fast, relief flaring, only for his sneaker to come down first. The sleeve squealed under rubber, edges grinding. The picture smeared against the tile, her father's cheek caught under the tread. The sound Leah made wasn't a cry. It was a sucked-in breath that snagged on something sharp in her chest. She froze, fingers splayed over the floor, eyes locked on the ruined plastic. She had never cared about glossy prints or signatures. But that photograph had lived in her bag since middle school, through the days she felt invisible and the ones she wished she had been. Seeing it ground into the school's floor was like watching a promise break. Trevor lifted his foot, theatrically gentle now, as if kindness after the crush mattered. He flicked the edge of the sleeve toward her with the toe of his shoe and laughed. "Not as tough as he looks on a poster." Leah snatched the photo and pulled it against her chest, the plastic grain dry against her palm. She thought of her father's rules about control. Never let someone else set your rhythm. She tried to breathe, to find that rhythm, but Trevor was already moving again, kneeling to scoop up her spiral notebook. He flipped through it with damp fingers. His grin returned when he found the page with her neat, narrow handwriting. "No one should stand alone," he read in a sing-song. "Justice, fairness, listen even when it's hard." He stretched the last word until it frayed. "That's adorable." "You gonna change the world with bullet points?" His friends howled, their laughter blooming, then thinning as it traveled along the ring of students who weren't sure whether to join. The phones stayed up. A girl near the lockers bit her lip and looked at the floor. A boy in a varsity jacket shuffled his sneakers and stared at the screens instead of the scene. Leah reached for the notebook. Trevor pulled it away, turning another page. There were doodles there, shapes she drew when her mind was too loud, little braces of thought, a pair of feet planted, a line that was meant to be a horizon. Her stomach twisted at the sight of those private scratches exposed in his hands. "Stand tall, even in the storm," he read from the margin. "Sweet. Here's the storm." He closed the notebook with a clap and tossed it. It skidded, spinning left, the pages bending under themselves. Leah lunged to save it. Trevor's foot landed on the cover before her fingers did. Cleaner this time. Practiced. Pick it up. Her shoulders tightened. She tried again to slide the notebook free. He pressed harder, balancing on the ball of his foot as if the pressure meant nothing to him, as if he could stand there forever. Somewhere on her right, someone cleared a throat. On her left, someone whispered, "Dude, chill." The whisper died without a reply. Trevor leaned forward, shadow swallowing her hands. "What's it like?" he said, voice low, pitched for her alone, though everyone heard the tone. "To wake up every day knowing you'll never be him? To carry his name like a shield you're too weak to lift?" She didn't look up. She couldn't. If she met his eyes, he would see the anger, the fear, the mix of both that made her feel like she'd swallowed wire. She kept her gaze on her fingers and the gray tile and the crease forming in the paper under his shoe. He released the pressure on the notebook so suddenly that she stumbled farther forward than she meant to. Before she could catch herself, his hand shot to the front of her jacket and he yanked her up. Her blades hit metal with a slap. The clang threw itself down the corridor and back again. He pinned her there with the length of his forearm braced under her collarbones. Not crushing yet, just holding, just the promise that he could. Leah's breaths came shallow and fast. The cold locker bled through fabric and skin. She could feel each rib expand against the barrier of his arm. She raised her hands to press his sleeve away, not hidden, not clawing, just trying to make space, to remind him that there were lines. He leaned in closer, stealing even that space. "Look at me when I talk to you," he said. She kept her eyes on the shoulder seam of his hoodie and counted the stitches because numbers held when words slipped. 1, 2, 3, his forearm pressed higher. 4, 5, her breath shortened. 6, she looked up, despite herself. What he wanted wasn't in his eyes. It was written over the scene, how the ring had tightened, how shoes squeaked and then stopped, how a teacher's head appeared at the far end and then withdrew like a fearful animal. He wanted the silence to crown him. "Say it," he murmured. "Tell me to stop." Her mouth opened. No sound came. She swallowed and tried again. His friends leaned in to listen, one of them unconsciously bracing a hand against a locker as if anchoring himself to what power felt like. Leah's throat worked around the word "stop" as if there were hooks in it. Trevor smiled, and the smile had nothing to do with humor. "Thought so." He let his forearm slide, slow as a clock hand until his palm cupped her throat. Not a squeeze, just weight at first, the wide heat of his hand announcing possession. The hallway shrank. Leah's fingers shot to his wrist, fingers digging in as if she could unhook him from her skin. His pulse beat against her thumb. Her own pulse leapt. The first pressure stole a thread of air. The second bent the thread in half. A ripple moved through the crowd. Even the ones with their phones up held them lower, as if the lens could carry blame back to them through the glass. Someone whispered, "Hey." Another said, "He's going too far." Shoes shifted. No one stepped forward. The sound of a notification pinged and then disappeared into the thick silence like a stone in mud. Leah's breath thinned to paper cuts. She tried the numbers again. In for 4, there was no 4. Out for 6, there was only 2. Panic is a thief that turns the body to a locked house. Her knees buckled and caught. Her fingers clawed for purchase and found none. The world narrowed, not like a dimmer, but like a funnel forcing everything saw into the single point of his grip. Trevor's friends stopped laughing entirely. Their mouths hung half open, as if the joke had jammed in their throats. A girl near the front lowered her phone to her side, her face ash pale. The varsity jacket kid took half a step, then glanced at the boys flanking Trevor and took the half step back. "Look at all of you," Trevor said, eyes flicking sideways, performing even now. The hand at Leah's throat tightened. "Legends, kid." Paper-thin Leah's vision began to freckle. The edges of the corridor curdled into a soft black static. She heard her own heartbeat shove into her ears, then skip, then slam. Her hand slipped on his wrist. She thought of the photo crushed a minute ago, of the tiny crease that had folded across her father's cheek. She pictured herself standing tall like she'd written, but the floor tilted and her legs refused. "Trevor," someone said from somewhere behind the ring, louder this time. It sounded like a name thrown into a well. He didn't turn. He leaned closer, enough that Leah smelled the sour-sweet cologne mixing with the heat of exertion. "Almost done," he hissed, to her, to himself, to the lens of every phone. Her body tried to cough and found no air to cough with. The world compressed into the oval of his hand and her throat. The lockers were just temperature. The crowd became a smear. She was aware, dimly, of her own hands falling from his wrist to her sides because they were too heavy to hold up. Somewhere in the static, another sound. Sneakers scuffing, a breath sucked in by 100 mouths at once, a silence tightening like a tourniquet. Her knees sagged. The wall held her in place as gravity tried to pull her down the locker face like rain. She wondered, oddly and without emotion, whether she would slide or drop. The thought flickered, a useless candle in wind. Then it went out. Blackness didn't arrive as a curtain. It came as a series of swallowed lights. First the fluorescence at the ceiling dimming into a glare, then the skin tones of faces bleaching to gray, then the shapes losing their edges, until all that remained was the warm, merciless ring of his fingers and the sound of blood struggling through narrow places. A single, detached part of her mind noted the hush, the way laughter had drained away and something else had taken its place. Not courage, not yet. Shame, maybe. Awe, maybe. The difference hardly mattered. No one moved. Leah tried to pull in one more breath, some final, stubborn proof that the body can rescue itself if the mind just asks hard enough. The breath broke in half before it reached her lungs. Her head grew light and huge at once. Her vision shrank to a coin. The phone screens, the posters about kindness, the tiled floor, Trevor's triumphant smirk, everything thinned to a hum at the edge of hearing. There was only the pressure, the failing rhythm of her chest, and a silence so complete it felt like the whole building had leaned in to listen to her not breath. The last thing she knew, before the coin of sight spun and went still, was the fact of the circle around them. The way a school can build a crowd faster than a conscience, the way 100 witnesses can equal no help at all. Then even that thought let go. The world around Leah had collapsed into fragments of sound and light, muffled voices, blurred outlines, the crushing heat of Trevor's hand on her throat. Her legs trembled, ready to give out completely. A part of her wanted to fight, but her body was betraying her, shutting down piece by piece. The laughter that had once filled the corridor was gone, replaced by a silence so heavy it pressed into every corner of the hallway. Even Trevor's friends shifted uneasily, sensing that the game had tipped into something darker. And then, beneath it all, came a new sound. It was quiet at first, nearly lost in the hum of fluorescent lights and the shuffle of nervous sneakers. But it grew clearer with every second. Footsteps. Slow, steady, deliberate. Each step landed with a weight that resonated through the corridor, not loud in volume, but absolute in presence. The sound alone made the students straighten, their heads snapping toward the far end of the hall. Trevor's grip faltered slightly as he turned his head, distracted. Even through the haze, Leah felt the shift. She forced her eyes open. Her vision, blurred and edged with black, caught movement at the end of the hallway. The crowd began to part instinctively, shoulders press into lockers, phones lowering, as though some primal instinct demanded they make way. Through the shifting students came a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of grace that was impossible to mistake. His posture was controlled, his gaze fixed forward, his presence filling the space like an approaching storm. Jean-Claude Van Damme had arrived. The aura he carried was unlike anything the students had ever felt. He didn't stride quickly or shout. He didn't need to. The stillness in his steps was more commanding than any scream. The legend of countless films, the man who had lived a life of discipline and training, stood here not as a movie hero, but as a father. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked on the boy whose hand still clutched his daughter's throat. Trevor swallowed hard. His bravado faltered for the first time. His smirk twitched and broke, replaced with the faintest flicker of uncertainty. The boy, who had ruled these halls with arrogance, now looked small against the force that entered the corridor. "Let her go." Van Damme's voice was calm, low, and steady. He didn't need volume. Every syllable cut through the silence with precision. The words rolled through the hallway like steel wrapped in velvet, commanding without effort. Trevor blinked, thrown off by the simplicity of the command. For a moment he didn't move, as if testing whether the authority in that voice was real. His fingers tightened on Leah's throat, but the tremor in his hand betrayed him. He looked down at her, then back up at the man now only a few feet away. Leah collapsed forward as Trevor's hand released suddenly, her knees hitting the floor hard. She gasped desperately, air rushing into her lungs like fire. The relief was painful, burning her chest, but she didn't look away from her father. Her eyes, wet and wide, locked onto him, a surge of safety rising through the haze of fear. Van Damme's gaze flickered briefly to his daughter, softening only for a heartbeat before returning to Trevor. He took one slow step forward. The sound of his heel against the tile was louder than any shout. Trevor stumbled backward instinctively, bumping into one of his own friends who quickly stepped away, unwilling to share his downfall. The swagger that had carried him moments ago drained from his stance. His shoulders hunched. His smirk failed to return. "You think strength is about crushing someone weaker?" Van Damme asked, his tone still low, every word deliberate. "You think it makes you powerful?" Trevor opened his mouth, searching for words, but nothing came. His throat bobbed as he tried to swallow the lump of fear that had risen. He glanced at the faces in the crowd, but no one laughed for him now. No one cheered. Their eyes were wide, fixed on the man advancing toward him. Another step, another. Van Damme moved like water, each stride smooth, measured, unstoppable. His presence erased every trace of Trevor's arrogance. The air itself seemed to bend, heavy with tension as the students leaned forward, unable to look away. Trevor panicked. In a desperate move, he shoved Leah aside, her body stumbling across the tile as he tried to create distance between himself and the legend closing in. It was a coward's tactic, using her as a shield, but it gave him no advantage, because Van Damme was already there. His hand shot out with speed that no one could follow, gripping Trevor's wrist with iron control. The boy yelped, his bravado shattering completely. In a fluid, practiced motion, Van Damme pivoted his body, pulling Trevor forward. His hip dropped, his stance lowered, and in an instant, Trevor's body left the ground. The throw was flawless, clean, efficient, devastating. Trevor's feet flailed helplessly in the air before his back crashed against the tile floor with a thunder that silenced even the sound of breath in the corridor. Gasps rippled through the crowd, phones dropped from hands, students stared, frozen, unable to comprehend how fast it had happened. Van Damme didn't let go. He crouched low, twisting Trevor's wrist into a controlled hold that sent sharp pain through the boy's arm without breaking it. Trevor squirmed, his face contorted in shock and fear, every ounce of his arrogance stripped away. The legend had reduced him to nothing in seconds. "This," Van Damme said quietly, leaning close enough that Trevor Ellen felt the full weight of the words, "is not strength." The hallway was dead silent. Every student, every teacher at the far end, every phone that had been recording, all of it was suspended in that moment. The scene belonged not to Trevor, not to the crowd, but to the man who had entered with nothing but footsteps and unshakable control. And in that silence, every witness understood. The balance of power in Westbrook High had just shifted forever. Trevor's body twisted under the hold, his wrist caught in Van Damme's iron grip. He whimpered, the sound sharp in the suffocating silence of the corridor. His bravado was gone, stripped away by a single, fluid motion that had left him sprawled on the floor. Students who had once cheered him on now stared wide-eyed, their phones lowered, their mouths dry. No one laughed, no one spoke. Van Damme crouched low, his posture calm, precise. His voice was steady, low, carrying more weight than any shout. "You thought strength was about crushing someone smaller, about humiliating them to make yourself feel tall." His eyes bored into Trevor's, unflinching. "That's not strength. That's cowardice." The words struck harder than the throw. Trevor tried to avert his eyes, but Van Damme leaned closer, forcing him to meet his gaze. "Real strength," he continued, "is discipline. It is control. It is the choice to protect, not to harm." A murmur rippled through the students. Some shifted uncomfortably, remembering how they had stood still, phones raised, while Leah was choked against the lockers. The shame seeped into the air, heavy, unavoidable. Teachers who had appeared at the far end of the hall looked frozen, pale, unable to deny their own silence. Van Damme tightened his grip just enough to make Trevor wince, then released him. Trevor slumped against the lockers, clutching his wrist, his face pale, his chest heaving. The boy who had strutted like a king now looked smaller than ever, stripped of power, reduced to nothing but fear and humiliation. Jean-Claude rose slowly, his presence towering. He turned his gaze to the crowd, his eyes sharp, his voice carrying through every corner of the hallway. "All of you watched," he said. "You whispered, you laughed, you filmed, and when his hand was at her throat, you did nothing." His tone cut like steel. "You think silence makes you innocent? It doesn't. Silence is permission. Laughter is encouragement. Looking away is the same as holding her down yourselves." The words fell like thunder. Students lowered their eyes, shame burning their cheeks. A girl near the front slipped her phone into her pocket, her hands shaken. A boy in a varsity jacket swallowed hard, unable to meet Van Damme's gaze. The weight of their complicity pressed into every chest. Van Damme extended his hand toward Leah. She hesitated only a moment before sliding her trembling fingers into his. He lifted her gently, his touch steady, protective. For the first time since the nightmare began, Leah's breathing steadied. She leaned into her father's side, clutching the crumpled photograph to her chest. The sight of them together broke something in the crowd. The illusion that cruelty made someone powerful, that silence absolved guilt, it all cracked under the reality standing before them. The legend of martial arts wasn't on a screen or in a ring. He was here, in a hallway, showing them what real power looked like. Trevor groaned faintly from the floor, trying to salvage his pride, but his friends had already edged away, unwilling to share in his defeat. No one reached down to help him. The crowd that once had fueled his arrogance now gave him nothing. Van Damme's gaze returned to him for a long moment. His voice was cold, deliberate. "If you ever lay a hand on her again, if you ever touch anyone weaker than you again, I will not stop at reminding you. I will teach you in a way you'll never forget." Trevor's lips trembled. No sound came. He lowered his gaze to the floor, stripped of every illusion of control. Jean-Claude turned back to the students, his words pressed into them like iron. Remember this. Strength is not in your fists, not in the fear you inspire. It is in your control, in your discipline, in your choice to protect when others stay silent. He scanned the faces before him, one by one, forcing each to hold the truth. Leah tightened her grip on his hand, her chest swelling with something new. Pride, relief, safety. For the first time that day, she felt seen, not as weak, not as invisible, but as someone worth defending, and deep inside, she knew she carried part of his strength with her. They began to walk. The crowd parted without a word, creating a path. Students lowered their heads, some in shame, some in awe. No one lifted a phone. No one dared whisper. The silence was no longer fearful, it was reverent. At the far end of the corridor, Van Damme paused one final time. He turned, his gaze sweeping across the students who had borne witness to everything. Power without control is nothing. Courage without compassion is empty. Discipline is what gives strength meaning. Remember that the words settled into the walls, into the air, into their memory. Then he turned away, guiding Leah through the doors and into the sunlight. The air outside was cool, fresh, untainted by the weight of silence and cruelty. Leah breathed deeply, her throat still sore but her lungs finally free. She leaned closer to her father, clutching the photograph against her chest, the warmth of his presence steady beside her. Inside, the hallway remained heavy with silence long after they had gone. Students stood frozen, their phones forgotten, their minds replaying what they had seen. Trevor stayed slumped against the lockers, his power gone, his pride shattered. And everyone there knew they had witnessed more than a confrontation. They had seen truth. They had seen the difference between cruelty and courage, between weakness and strength, between silence and justice, and they would never forget it. If this story struck you, don't stop here. Hit that subscribe button, share your thoughts in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. Your support keeps these stories alive. Be part of the journey.